Our case is relatively straightforward. Trump's biggest sin, among many, is the fact that he has destroyed the technocratic, centrist, and effective governance that America needs to begin to heal. We obviously recognise that he's a racist and a misogynist and needs to be defeated on those grounds. But we think the rot that has triggered him goes deeper, and it goes deeper into the issues around government shutdown, the failure of effective legislative lawmaking, and the heightened partisanship that means that Americans feel their government is broken and they thought they needed to give it a shot in the arm. Hillary, yes, has some downsides as a candidate, but she remains an arch-technocrat, a skilled policymaker, and someone who can credibly work with a GOP-controlled Senate and recognise the limitations of her role created by a GOP-dominated SCOTUS. That's why we think her and her coalition of white suburban moms are the perfect people that the Democrats need to rely on to win the next election. And then most critically, given that we think that pretty much any Democrat with a pulse could win the next election, govern effectively afterwards. Our model is relatively straightforward. The Democrats should nominate Hillary Clinton. We're pretty confident that she'll be alive, and we're pretty confident that she'll live long enough to govern. We recognise that she has a charisma gap, so we'll also nominate Beto O'Rourke to be her running mate. We'll then have a staged managed primary process where Bernie Sanders will challenge her from the left and allow her to get some bona fides, but also clearly stake herself as a centrist who can govern sensibly. And also we're going to have Mike Vianetti run on the right as the populist firebrand so that she can differentiate herself, and while still getting some good sound bites that can be used in the election. Now, the case is relatively straightforward. Point 1, we think she'll win. Point 2, we think the other candidates will suck. And point 3, we think she'll be the most effective person to actually govern the mighty United States. No, thank you. Why will she win? Trump's really bad and people have woken up to that, right? Like his floor of support is clearly 40%, and the down ballot effects are now so egregious we had the biggest blue wave since the Nixon scandals. Suburban women are basically aligning very strongly with the Democrats, and the advantage is that women live longer, so as you get older, there are more women, and they consistently vote. So a demographic split by gender is hugely advantageous to the person of suburban women. They're also spread into geographically advantageous regions like the Midwest, because essentially women are everywhere, and which is useful, right? She has all of the minority votes who very rightly have recognised that the GOP hasn't been great for her. We also think people feel sorry for her, right? Like, there's a really strong narrative that the election was stolen from her. More people voted for her than Trump. We think she enjoys quite a lot of advantages, plus name recognition, that means that she'll be a very good candidate. We also think that as long as she makes essentially as well as generic Democrats do, which we think is pretty likely given that she is literally the most generic Democrat, we think that she'll be fairly able to adapt her strategy from the lessons learned last time. They'll campaign in the Midwest, the blue wall will exist, and we think it should be relatively easy to defeat a weakened and undermined Trump, as we've seen the Democrats have already been able to systematically do in the midterms. We also just think that Trump's not going to be able to necessarily separate himself from the hugely unpopular GOP legislative agenda that caused them to essentially be turfed out in the previous midterms. It's going to be very difficult, given how inept he is, for him to actually make any meaningful policy gains that differentiate himself for that platform. So he'll remain the person who tried to steal your healthcare. He'll remain an ignorant and useless buffoon, and we think it's very likely that Hillary will cruise control to victory. No, thank you. So why will no one else do as good? Well, the problem is that if you have another person who's not Hillary, there's no natural front runner, right? So you have to have a multi-field primary. The GOP tried that recently, didn't work out very well for them. Why? Because when you have 16 candidates, but you only need to command a small plurality through every stage of the elimination process, you have a massive incentive to radicalise yourself, to run as a populist who gets good sound bites but doesn't necessarily say sensible things, and to essentially attempt to basically differentiate yourself either on the grounds of the anti-Trump or as someone who runs as left-wing as possible to appeal to a narrow slice of voters who represent Democratic primary voters. We think that means it's actually very likely that someone like Mike Avenatti, who will run really strongly on anti-Trump in rhetoric, will play it really well with the base and could possibly get through the system and end up being nominated the person for the Democrats candidate. Or someone like Bernie Sanders, who is an ancient old communist, or someone who is simply untested in any meaningful contest because they're young and inexperienced, like Beto, which is why he's going to be our second in charge. And we think that very likely means that they will elect someone who's functionally unelectable, the same way the GOP elected someone who's functionally unelectable and only very narrowly eked out a win against a seasoned campaigner. So we think that's essentially a risk that you can only mitigate by appointing Hillary, whose vast Hillary machine, vast name recognition, and general ability to manipulate the process to make sure she wins means that you won't have a functional primary and you avoid any of that potential hassle, which we think is great for ensuring that you get a good, solid, tried and tested candidate who can actually face down Donald Trump. Close.
Given that Hillary Clinton is by far the most unpopular person in the country with Republican voters, wouldn't any Republican who chose to work with her in a bipartisan situation be immediately primaried by someone more radical?
I just don't think she's actually that unpopular, right? Like, she's obviously got deep unfavourables with a minority of voters, but she still won like a majority of the popular vote last time. And like, time heals wounds, right? She has an awesome opportunity to re-narrate around herself as the person who is saving the country, following the gross national mistake that was Donald Trump, that the majority, like, quite a number of Republicans are now beginning to recognise. And we think that that is something that, we just don't think she's that damaged, right, compared to a relative of any Democrat in the eyes of a hyper-partisan GOP group, right? The young, charismatic, Trump-opposing liberal that you're likely to nominate an alternative to her is very likely to very quickly become unpopular with that very same constituency for the very same reasons. Plus, she's battle-hardened, she knows how to take a hitch. I'm sure she'll sort it out. Right. Why would Hillary be a great president? She is super smart, well-educated on policy issues, and has smart, technocratic people surrounding her. She has great social networks. Like, literally, her hobby is like coming up with awesome policy solutions to support America. And she hangs out with all the smart people in Washington and New York who think about these issues all the time. She'll be able to do what she was functionally nearly able to do the previous election, which was win and bring a White House ready to go on day one and begin technocratically and effectively fixing the problems that face America. And the thing is, there are lots of obvious problems that have probably have enjoyed broad bipartisan support that in a functional legislative environment, which we think she'll be more able to create because of her effective political management skills, can get across the line. We're talking things about child tax credit, expansion of Medicare, and comprehensive immigration reform, or at least some immigration reform that isn't like insane, that actually has quite strong support in a GOP-controlled Senate that is attempting to differentiate itself from the Trump era, but also is something that we think can peel off sufficient numbers of moderate Republicans in the House, assuming the Democrats don't continue to enjoy an overwhelming majority in the House, and actually get stuff across the line. And she's a wheeler and a dealer, and we think that's what the Democrats need. What they don't need is someone running on an extreme policy platform that activates the GOP's legislative and SCOTUS defence mechanisms and results in being unable to make progress. So where do we stand at the end of my speech? We think she'll win, we think she'll be a great president, and we think she deserves it because it was stolen from her last time. What better rationale do we need?
Richard was pretty wrong when he said that people feel sorry for Hillary Clinton. And the reason for that is, it's really hard to feel sorry for someone who struggles to show human empathy, has never had a friend who isn't white and rich, is, completely out of touch with the average American, who failed to show any dignity in her defeat at the hands of Donald Trump, and who has incessantly blamed her failures and failings on other people. Hillary Clinton is almost universally loathed in America, as Nick said, and with good reason. We think she would be a heinous candidate for president and a terrible president. Right, what am I going to do for you in this speech? 3 things. First, I'm going to talk about what the Democrats actually need to win this next election, because unfortunately